Hello folks, this is Sterling here, and I'd like to tell you about a phone call that I made. Okay, so this phone call that I made, it was to a very, very good friend of mine, a long-time friend of mine. I've known her for most of my life. And this was really my second action learning experiment. I talked about my first action learning experiment in my previous video, and this is the second one. And what I did with this phone call was probably a little strange. I sent her a text and said, hey, do you have time for a quick phone call? Because of COVID and the like, I knew that she was working from home and she was available pretty quick. And I said, okay, well, here's the question. And in fact, there's two of them, and they may seem a little bit out of left field. And I asked her, what are the type of things that cause her to sense God in the world or around her and sense God's presence? And the second was, how has she seen God in action recently? How has she seen God in the world? And it was a really, really interesting conversation. How did I pick this friend, and why did I pick this friend? Well, to be honest, I didn't just cold call any old friend. She has been sort of on a spiritual journey, moving from different forms of agnosticism into some sort of, quasi-Christianity. Now she's in this sort of syncretic space between sort of Wiccan paganism and Christianity. She's just really exploring, and I figured this was a good question, and if the Holy Spirit's at work at anybody in the world, I assumed it was her. So, but what was really interesting to me is that she then turned around and she posted on Facebook that she had gotten a call from a very good friend, and she asked her Facebook community those two questions. And then, because she's this sort of modern-day quasi-pagan, she says, all right, anybody who gives me an answer to any or both these questions, I'll draw a tarot card. And she also, being her nice self, said, if you don't believe in a deity, you can put in universal love or some other power. It was really interesting. So, first, here's something that I noticed. She posts a lot on Facebook, and so the amount of conversation and chatter around this post was a lot more. There was about 24 or so comments and sort of back and forth discussion on this post. But also on this post, there was very few. Everybody who liked it loved it. So there was 3 loves. But those were the reactions. That's a lower number of reactions. Part of what happened in this conversation, which was really interesting, is that, one person just sort of answered the question right off the bat. This is how I see God. Talked about how, with Black Lives Matter movements and some other things that have been going on, she's sort of seeing the amount of this stuff happening in unexpected places and how it sort of makes her cry. There was another person who says, look, I'm agnostic, pretty much atheistic, but you know what? If there is a God, here's where I see God, in nature, in the space, and that was really interesting. One person said, you know what? My friend had also later posted, hey, look, guys, I see how many people of you have seen this post. Why haven't you responded? You folks usually are really good at responding. In fact, her tarot card things where she'll draw a tarot card, folks. Oh my gosh, have all the comments. Everybody wants a tarot card. But people didn't want to answer these questions for the tarot card. She's like, what's going on? And one person responded and said, yeah, I don't know if I believe, so I don't want to say anything. Potentially on Facebook, and be comfortable with it, and that was really interesting. And in fact, that even the sort of atheist sort of says, I don't know, I believe, but this is what I think about God, and thus this is where I saw God. So, sort of seeing this happen, I think this is something that I at least learned about people. It seems really interesting to me that you can't really give an honest answer. To give an honest answer really to how do you perceive God, or where have you seen God in action, without also making an identity statement about God. This is who God is, and that there's sort of a respect there on the topic of the divine that people have, that even folks that are sort of atheists and they're just, it could also be Facebook, but that there's a discomfort here on sort of touching into that divine space and making a claim about God, and that maybe, I'm sort of guessing here, but maybe they didn't feel legitimate or authorized to make a claim about God because of their own questioning of God's existence and their own faith and belief in God and what that's like. And that's really interesting to me. And I have to think about that, like how, in terms of like our mission work, you know, that we will have that the resistance isn't about, man, it's rude to talk about religion. It's like, man, I don't want to say something wrong. I don't want to say something incorrect. There's like almost like a fear of offending or fear of making a mistake or a fear of heresy, like what if they turn around and believe. I wonder if that is it. I don't know if that is the case. And that, again, it's really interesting that even in these cases that there's like a respect for that name of the divine, the name of God in this situation. And just sort of looking at that conversation, and I said it was really exciting, and how serious even some of the most, you know, hostile folks to religion would even say, like, well, I think about theology a lot. Like, that's also really interesting, that like human beings, even ones that are who believe their unbelief, their personal choice of unbelief is determinative of them, are still thinking thoughts about God and the divine, and have claims related to those things, which are all, at the end of the day, identity claims. Okay, so that's what I learned. Maybe you should try to give somebody a phone call, ask them those questions. Again, and those were, you know, how do you sense God's presence? You know, what are things are like? What are things like with you when you sense God's presence? The second question is, where have you seen God in action in the world around you recently? Make that phone call to a good friend, and maybe you invite them to go and ask that question as well. It generates some real interesting work, and some access, I wonder, and opening to the old Holy Spirit, I wonder. All right, God bless you.